The approaches to reference interval establishment could be either population based, which is done in most of the analytes, so that to 95% of the population has cholesterol between this and this, or creatinine between this and this. It could be subject based. So for a particular type of individual, this could be the reference range. It could be outcome based. For example, HbA1c, where then a glycemic goal becomes the reference point. It could also be based on medical decisions. Tomorrow, Dr. Rahul Jagedar is going to speak about 17-hydroxyprogesterone in newborns. That's why I have taken this. He will explain to us how the value of 17-hydroxyprogesterone will give his differential diagnosis, the rise in 17-OHP. Or it could also be based on healthy subjects and method reproducibility, for example, troponin. So there are these various approaches to reference intervals. Now, in many laboratories, the reference interval for analytes are usually adapted from the manufacturer's recommendation or taken from the literature without any reservation. The method for establishing the reference intervals given by the manufacturer is usually, again go back to the kit inserts, and you will see that they are not exactly giving us the method with which or by which they have established the reference range. By that I mean, they are not telling us exactly the number of subjects they had selected. Usually the finding is that the number is pretty low. Sex and age may not be specified, especially for reference intervals of new biochemical markers. It's a simple logic. They are launching an assay. There's already a huge amount of expense involved. Now to go and make cohorts of all sorts of age and sex, different groups, and try to see the reference intervals for each group is a Herculean task. So they may not do it, and they may give us slightly limited information. More challenges are that if the analyte itself is extremely heterogeneous, we have gone through quite a few of them, then the molecule itself is not well defined and the epitope picked up. For example, initial vitamin D assays were not picking up D2 and D3 both, whereas all the literature was being published, which was being done by the LCMS method, which was picking up every possible component of the vitamin D molecule. And we were trying to compare that LCMS with the kits which were not even picking up D2, D3 at that point. Now they are. So again, harmonization is important, and what statistics they use to come to these reference intervals is also important. So again, what I'm just trying to sensitize us to the fact that we cannot take or transfer the reference ranges from either the kits or literature without reservations. Pediatric is even bigger challenge because, like I said, many age and sex patterns are required. You want to do FSH 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and you need probably 500 to 1,000 children in each of these groups being bled, and then the reference range intervals being established. It's a difficult task. That is why we don't have them. Now, we tried. I had traveled to the US in 2008, and I got this book. I was very happy that, okay, now I've got a book and probably my problems will be solved. But when I opened it, what happened was they had about 4 or 5 reference ranges, and below that they have actually given the methodology. That is, this particular range is for say IMX, this is for CMIA, this is for CLI, and so on. So basically the problem was not solved with this also. We do not know how to transfer the reference interval established by one method meaningfully to another method which you are doing in the lab. So there is a program going on called the Caliper program, which is helping which is trying to transfer the pediatric reference intervals for a number of markers from Abbott assays to other manufacturers. This is at the moment happening, and it's called the Caliper program. There's also something called as biological variation. When we talk about variation in results, it's not always only pre-analytical or analytical that we have to look at. There's a very simple concept in the body of homeostasis, or a thermostat, which is there in a refrigerator. So if there's a homeostatic point, and all your values during the day are fluctuating around this homeostatic point, obviously you're going to get some variation through the day or through the lifespan of an individual. This is known as biological variation. There's both an intra-individual variation and an inter-individual variation. which is, there's a lot written now on biological variation. You can get the literature of Google, if you Google for it. And Callum Fraser is the authority which is giving a lot of material on biological variation. It can help us every day to interpret our immunoassays. Now, serial measurements in E2 was something which Bhavna discussed. Now, what happens in serial measurements are, there are two things. Because the values are inherently high, there's a hook effect which is involved, which you have to understand well. Another thing is if you dilute the sample. So when you're doing a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 20 dilution, please remember that the basic assay, it was for human serum. That was the matrix which was going to be used for the basic assay. And now you've diluted it to 1:10 or 1:20. So you have changed the matrix itself for the assay. So there's going to be a matrix effect. And after doing this, we are supposed to get a meaningful value out of the serial monitoring. With that, again, there's another concept which is reference change values. So when you're doing a serial monitoring, say of something as simple as sugar or as complex as AMH, you should know what is the relative change that is happening between your previous measurement and this measurement. How much of it is because of the analytical variation, and how much is it because of some actual change in the patient. So this is known as a reference change value. Again, I've given the site below where it's an information site for laboratory medicine, and where you can, if you're interested, look up both biological variation and reference change values. Then we talk about repeat testing. So this is something which I wanted to share. Maybe I even would ask the audience that when we are going to do a repeat testing, does it make sense to repeat on the same sample, same platform, and by the same person? No. So then the corollary would be, we'll have to have a different sample, that is, a repeat fresh sample, a different platform, and a different person doing the assay. So every time, all three may not be possible, but at least we should try to see that we are fulfilling two of these three criteria when we repeat the sample to get any meaningful insight. Because the assay may be different, the epitopes picked up may be different, so many things. The platform itself may have a higher or lower sensitivity. Now, immunoassay data capture and processing is also important, and it can really help us, because if we look at it can help us look at statistical QC well as cumulative reports. So if your lab can generate a report where the patient's last 10 or 15, 20 values will flash before you finalize today's value, it can really help the process a lot. So labs should try to develop good LIS interfacing and middleware which can handle data in such a way that it gives you both these informations, a cumulative report as well as a delta check. In a delta check, what your system would do is, it would automatically look at the previous report and alert you if there is too much difference between the two values which is not explained either physiologically or pathologically, both. So if there's a small delta value difference, then the patient is probably stable for that analyte. But a large delta value, one or many in serial measurements, could mean a true physiological change or a possible error. So it will help you to go back and investigate the error before you release the report on that day.